just wanted to commend you for all of the documents that you lined up. There's a lot going on in your story. I want to hit some of the key points that I think will help us make better sense of this and see what we can add to it. You're looking for a comprehensive treatment plan to address the executive function challenges.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure is the treatment plan necessary. There's been a lot of work done over the years, and there have been a lot of inputs. And depending who I ask, I know that I'm still struggling in certain areas. I don't necessarily know the etiology for sure. And with these things, I know that they can overlap and become quite difficult to tease apart. So it was really more clarity on what's going on, why am I not functioning optimally in the world after all this work I've put in, and then, what can be done about it, because I always believe that something can be.
So it sounds like I had the impression maybe academically you were doing really, really well, but sometimes people who are really bright can function well academically, but still have attention difficulties. Do you think earlier in schooling, like elementary school, junior high, high school, that there were any sort of concentration or focus or learning issues, attention issues going on?
Yes. The evidence of that for me would be in like third, fourth, fifth grade, they would give us grades, and then they'd also give us a conduct and an effort score. And I would have straight A's, but my conduct and my effort grades would be very, on a 1 to 5, 1 excellent, 5 poor, 3s, 4s, and sometimes even 5s. And so there was an element of getting in trouble a lot because I was giggling and seemingly like ringleading some clowning in class. And then, but the grades were always great. There was a tendency to be super interested in some things, but not others. And that didn't really come to a bigger impasse until towards the end of high school with, AP classes and calculus, and just being like, why would anyone want to know this type feelings? And then I started to see, I think in high school, like towards the end of high school, maybe I got a couple B's or something like that, which was kind of reflected of a lack of interest.
So what I'm hearing is that there are, it sounds like definitely some impulsivity stuff, like the giggling, the joking, the class clown stuff.
Yes.
Was there also like physical hyperactivity, like you had a lot of energy, a wiggle worm, hard to sit in your seat, that kind of stuff as well?
Yes. And I started actually running in first grade. And it was a way to bleed off energy, but it was something that I felt I had to do. I also, in class, it was never, horrible stuff or bullying or stuff like that, but there was this busyness, and I'd often get sent out into the hallway for being disruptive. And I remember, though, a lot of laughing. Like, school was fun for me because it was social or something. But the answer to that is yes, with the activity. And, unless I was escaping into books, I was outside. There was really no like playing calmly with dolls type stuff.
You were bright, you were high energy, you were doing well, but kind of almost more energy than you knew how to contain.
And I think that's why I gravitated so much to sports.
You also started to incur some head injuries.
Yes. When I was young, I had, playground type. I remember, falling off a snowbank that I was conquering and smashing the back of my head. And that was the first time I ever had completely lost my breath. This was like second or third grade. And I remember it was kind of this scary thing, but this is 1987 or something. So, and then in high school, yes, some assorted smashing heads with other people, playing soccer, trying to headbutt the ball into the goal. There were some really big, just smashing heads, usually with other people, not the floor, when I was playing basketball. None of them that ever seemed to like completely like nothing catastrophic to my knowledge.
Physical injury to the head, it has an impact. Our brains are overbuilt to be able to withstand some stuff, but every time there's a knock like that, whether it seems like a big deal or not, it's like taking a little bit more money out of the checking account, and then you eventually end up with a negative balance. Why don't we go to some of the findings right now?
Yep.
These are examples of normal surface SPECT and active SPECT views. You ready to take a look at your first surface scan?
Am I ever?
Are you ever? Okay,
nervous.
good. You did one study, which was when you were concentrating. We have the concentration study. And remember, color doesn't matter on these surface scans. We're looking for stuff to be symmetrical. We're looking for shapes to be well filled out. And if there's a drop in blood flow, we might see something that looks like a hole or a dent or more ripply surface. I told you it takes a 45% drop to show any of those abnormalities. We can change the setting on the machine to show you what your brain would look like with 10% better blood flow. So before we look at any of these, I want to show you that comparison side by side. So this is the 10% better version. So sometimes people sort of see stuff that looks like, oh my God, there's a hole there. It's not a hole. It's just an area that's not getting as much blood flow.
Okay, got it.
So this is your brain concentrating what the blood flow looks like. And then this is if it were 10% better. So this is the left temporal lobe. And we see over on the comparison scan, to me, the temporal lobes, they kind of look like two lumps of mashed potatoes on a Thanksgiving plate. And here it looks like somebody's been digging into the mashed potatoes.
Right.
And again, your temporal lobes are there. There are parts of them not getting good blood flow. So what do temporal lobes do? There are important memory structures in the temporal lobes, like the hippocampus, the amygdala. Language function is in the temporal lobes. Sometimes when temporal lobes get damaged, there can be changes in mood, irritability, or instability. The temporal lobes were one area where we saw some drops in blood flow. We also saw this area here. This is the area right behind the forehead, over where the eye sockets are, or orbits. It's called the inferior orbital prefrontal cortex. And again, on concentration, these were mild changes. Prefrontal cortex is kind of our brain's air traffic controller. So it's planning, attention, focus, forethought, the kinds of things that often people with ADD and ADHD really struggle with. And there are some mild changes across the surface of the brain. The surface of your brain here, a little bit more ripply compared to the comparison scan, something we call scalloping. And all of these things indicate some mild changes in blood flow for you. So this is your active view. So on the comparison, we have a very active cerebellum, and everything else is kind of nice and chill and blue. And for you, we have a little bit the opposite. So we have a cerebellum that looks really quiet. And again, remember that's an area that you saw some of the shearing on the MRI. And now we're looking at the blood flow. So we're looking at two different imaging technologies. They're looking at two different kinds of things, but they're kind of saying something similar, that there's less activity there. So I mentioned the cerebellum is very densely packed. It's an area that's responsible for coordinating smooth motor movement, but it also has connections to some of the deeper emotional structures in the brain and the frontal lobes for planning. So we think it also has a big role in kind of higher order decision-making, coordination of thoughts and feelings. It is not, it's not an uncommon finding to have a less active cerebellum for people with ADD or ADHD. And I've kind of compared it to, because there are a lot of people like you with ADHD that are super bright, but it can be kind of like you have the Library of Alexandria, you have amazing volumes, but there's not always a librarian at the front desk to get you what you need when you need it.
That's so funny that you say that, because that's an analogy I've been using of, imagine a vast library, but you don't have a card catalog and you need someone to bring you to each book because they're not organized. I love that.
The part that I circled here on the left and its companion part on the right, these are the basal ganglia. Basal ganglia are, they set the brain's emotional idle. When we see those more lit up, that can be associated with anxiety or sometimes even outright panic. Our brain's error detection system is part of the basal ganglia. So sometimes people with a more active basal ganglia can be more fault finding. They sort of see what's wrong with stuff, find the error and stuff. And then mildly active here, this is the anterior cingulate. Anterior cingulate is the brain's gear shifter. When we see more activity there, that can be associated with different inflexible kinds of thinking, like more obsessive or compulsive, having a negative thought, having a harder time letting it go, getting into an argument, digging your heels in, having an idea in your head, and like once the idea is there, going with it, even if it's a bad idea, not having that kind of flexibility.
These are familiar topics to me.
I think part of the challenge, Amanda, in terms of what a long-term plan is going to look like, one challenge is how to feed the adrenaline in a healthy way. And I think as long as you're making decisions for sort of safe adrenaline rushes, you can enjoy the engine that you have. And I think there's a piece of it also being finding a way to not need to prove yourself so much and be happy with, to be the human being rather than the human doing.
Right.
That doesn't sound like a cliche. To be okay with just being.
Right.
And that doesn't mean necessarily being still. You can be active because you're an active kind of person, but there's a certain sort of inner stillness. That, and it sounds like that part feels unsettled, and that I get the sense that's part of the unhappiness about you not being where you think you're supposed to be. My guess would be, if you were talking to a friend of yours, you would be telling them, you're fine, you're doing everything you can, you're doing great. Right. Sit down, have a cup of tea, give yourself a pat on the back.
Right.
So, Amanda, it has been absolutely lovely speaking with you. I need to wrap up right now. I'm going to be writing a summary note about how I put your story together. It's going to be the really condensed version, because you have novels to tell, and interestingly, I think you are working on a book about your experience. You have a ton of interesting stuff to say. I will be maybe first in line to buy a copy.